Hello and welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. I'm Catherine Camp, your hostess for this show. This is where we dig into those difficult topics of our day in our culture in order to engage everyone around us with conversations that count, conversations with an eternal perspective. Today, I have a dynamite pastor on that I met last year at a conference at his church in Ohio. And I began to notice that there are certain pastors that are really speaking up. It doesn't matter the size of the congregation. It matters what is being said. And he is a warrior. And you know how I feel about warriors and pastors. It takes a bold person to stand up, especially in our culture today. Today I have Pastor Niel Peterson. He may be a doctor, I don't know. We'll ask. Pastor Niel is a third-generation pastor serving as the senior pastor of Harvest Revival Center. He believes we are in the end of the age and that spiritual warfare is a necessity for the end-time church. His passion is to awaken and empower believers, affirming that the church is alive and active today with a strong focus on revival. He has been leading his congregation and region in contending for spiritual renewal. That is so important today. He's been doing this for the past 6 years. He's a dedicated family man. He has been married for 22 years and has 3 daughters aged 21, 15, and 13. Let's get him on the show.
To be on your show today, and I'm not a doctor, not yet anyway. But thank you for that. But I want to thank you. One of the things during your introduction, I saw that confronting truth in a hostile culture, and you can't, in such a few amount of words, that cannot be more of a truthful statement, because truth in of itself is hostile. And, it's only the lies that keep people in their slumber, but the truth comes to set us free. But the truth often sounds like bad news.
Yes.
And when the bad news, though, is, even our salvation, I think that's why, particularly in the pulpit, so many pastors have compromised, because they want to encourage, which is at the heart of the nature of, I think, our humanity. But in reality, until we realize that, hey, the fate of our soul is death, and the gospel has to be presented, that until you get the good news, and the gospel is good news, we have to realize that there's a lot of bad news leading up to that. So again, it's great to be on your show, and I'm excited to see what the Lord has in store for us today.
Thank you, Pastor Niel. Me too. It's really difficult to believe for people like yourself and for like myself, who I guess my whole life has been about the end times, because God brought me to those passages in the book of Revelation at the age of 8 and 9. And I really took it seriously. Somehow the idea of the Antichrist really seeped in to me, and the fact that there would be such great deception in the end, that many people would actually think that the Antichrist was the Savior. And I always prayed, God, don't let me be fooled. I want to know you. I want to know Jesus. I want to know the truth. And I didn't realize what I was praying for at a young age, but that's what I was praying for. And God started to give me great discernment. And then I began to see things that no one else would see happening around me and connecting the dots. So it's hard for me to believe that people, even in the church, don't believe that these are the end days. I mean, Jesus told us, right? He said, these are the end days. And he said, even now, it's the end times, but everything is fitting together now that we read. What has been why you came to the conclusion that these are the end days? It sounds like a silly question.
Yeah.
I think it might help people out there. Why a pastor like yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can't agree with you more. The discernment that you speak of, that God has given you. And I think for discerning people, they see that there was this congruent nature that God had given them throughout their life. that is sometimes easy to take it for granted, because discernment isn't as common as we would think. I think that's why, speaking particularly to the church, there's so many people that are deceived, even within the walls of their congregation. And to be very honest, the pastors that lead many of the congregations, and this isn't a war against the churches, because there is really only one church, one body, one Lord, one Savior, one Christ. But it's the reality that the enemy uses schemes and tactics and warfare and spiritual warfare to bring us into deception. And one of the things, if you go back to Luke 4:18, which I preach often on, the opening of the ministry of Christ, when he opens the scroll of Isaiah and he begins to share that, as he reads the text, prophesying of himself, that he came to set the captives free, to give sight to the blind. And part of the sight to the blind is understanding that we're blinded, we're deceived until he gives us sight. So by nature, unless Christ is in us, we're deceived. Now, what's interesting, just to try to congruently bring this together, I think with the 2020, when there was obviously a shift in COVID and, the election and everything that was happening, there was this dissatisfied nature of what there was a group of people, and I call them rebels, Catherine. And I don't mean that necessarily in a good way. I mean that maybe kind of in a middle way, and I'll bring this together, that these rebels that seek truth but couldn't find it, right? That they kind of started pooling together. And these rebels, oftentimes I saw these people that they weren't necessarily churched, right? But yet they were adamant about seeking truth. And what we begin to see is that there were people in the churches, right? And I'm talking about the lowercase church, many different churches scattered around the world, but
Right.
particularly in America, that we're finding that, hey, I'm finding out through not just in religion, but I'm finding out that the government's lying to us, my pastor's lying to us, education's lying to us. And all of a sudden they're thinking, hey, I need to find other people. And you mentioned warriors who will fight against this. These were the mama bears. These were the anti-vaxxers. These were the, you're not going to tell me that I'm going to lose my job if I don't take the, what.
Mm-hmm.
And so why all this is important is because I think from a religious context, we view everything through what God's doing in the church. But then from a true spiritual context, we realize that God owns it all, right? And so God's not just interested in what happens to the church. He's interested in all aspects of all of his creation. And so it's not just one thing. And I think as a pastor's kid growing up in the church, I had that mindset for a long time. It was really just about the church, and then everything else matters. And when in reality, that's the very thing that got us into this problem, is for decades, the church had turned its back on government. They said, hey, we're not going to ever mention a candidate's name. We're never going to tell you who to vote for. Meanwhile, culture, society, entertainment, they're telling you exactly who to vote for.
Oh, yeah.
And so all of a sudden we got ourselves into the place where the church had lost its authority, right? There was no authority outside of this domain. The enemy had been deceiving very godly men and women slowly. And then the enforcers, and again, excuse me for my voice. I preached all day yesterday and I just lost it. But then what happened, Catherine, is the enforcers, to train and equip future pastors, future ministers, they would enforce their own. And so instead of the government enforcing, let's say, a 501c3, right, and trying to put a lid on what a pastor says,
Right.
it's actually the denomination, or it's the spiritual father, or the bishop, or whatever title you want to give it. And so why this is important is because the religious institution is the one that capped the truth.
Hey, thanks for watching the Faith and Culture show. If you'd like to continue this particular episode, please go to the Rumble link below or click on the QR code and join me on the free speech platform over there. look for the name of the episode and start about the 10-minute mark. I hope to see you there because it's a good one.